I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw it on Instagram and YouTube years back, I didn't think it was a real lens. But then I saw it, and I saw it again, and I saw Macro Room use it, and MKBHD used it. Daniel Schiffer and Peter McKinnon went shot for shot with it, which, for the record, if you two are watching, I'm formally challenging either of you two. Shot for shot challenge. You pick the rules. I bet a silver medal will probably look good on either one of you, so let's talk. But then I realized it's a real thing. I gotta try it. So I messaged Laowa and I was like, hey, can I play with your lens? Kinda sounds weird, but I did. And here we are now. This is Laowa's 24mm f14 probe lens. Probe lens because, well, it's shaped like a probe. But when it came in the mail, I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, it's here. I ripped it open and I was like, what am I gonna shoot with it? So it's such like a niche lens. It only serves a few purposes, but it serves them very well. First of all, it's incredibly macro. Like touch the front of the barrel and it's still in focus macro. Like stick it in front of your eye and it's in focus macro. So that's incredible. And also, since it is such a long probe lens, you can stick it in extremely weird, narrow spaces. Like even a couch cushion or in a beer can and get like that funnel shot, anything like that, which also raises a point. The whole front, I think up to like about right here of the barrel is waterproof. So you can submerge it into water, into liquids and get those really cool, like, you know, submarine shots or whatever you want to call them, where it's submerging into the water. So it's a really cool lens that serves just a few purposes, but it serves them really well. So I was playing around a lot with it. I was just going around the house and finding anything that would make sense to use this probe lens for. And I started to get this idea of coffee or coffee cup on coffee beans and coffee beans pouring all around the lens and the cream pouring into the coffee, making a huge mess, so on and so forth. So we're gonna do it together. And it was a pretty simple setup, honestly. The first step, I just went to the grocery store, got a generic bag of whole coffee beans, and I brought those back and I found a place on the table where I wanted to shoot. And since I knew it was gonna get pretty messy later, to make cleanup easier, I took a foam board and just set it flat down on the table. And then from there, I took a coffee mug in the middle and poured coffee beans all around this because I just wanted a pool of coffee beans filling up the entire frame. So I checked the framing, I just made sure that everything was blocked off. You couldn't see the surface below it, and all you saw was this coffee mug and a pool of coffee beans. I took a few dry runs just to test out, you know, how I want to pour the beans, how fast, how slow, how many of them. And it took a few different tries, but the cool thing about having this long, narrow barrel of the lens is that when you pour things like beans from around every angle of it, it looks like the beans are just kind of raining down into frame from every which angle. And it has this really cool, unique look that you really can't get with many other lenses. So did a few dry runs, kind of got a feel for how many beans. And then after that, I knew I wanted to shoot 120 frames per second just to really slow everything down, slow down that splash once the cream hits the coffee, slow down the beans raining in. And then from there, I just had to determine the height of which I wanted the camera and how small or large I wanted the coffee mug in the frame. But once I got that in place, I was really ready to set up the lighting. So to light this, I only took 2 different lights and it was a pretty simple setup, but lighting is very important with this lens. And the reason for that is that since it's an f14 minimum lens, everything is very, very, very dark. So you need to bring in a lot of lighting so you don't have to rely on the camera's ISO. And another really unique thing about this lens is that there's actually LEDs in the front element of the barrel. So when things are really dark, but you gotta get really close to something and you don't have the lighting, you can, you know, turn on that LED and brighten up the entire frame, which it is definitely helpful. But sometimes if you don't want this, you know, spotlight direct forward-facing light, it's not necessarily as helpful, but it's definitely helpful to have some kind of LEDs on there. It's got a micro USB plug right there on the front of the barrel. I've got it just plugged into a V-mount right now, but anything USB, a USB block would work just fine. But it's definitely really cool to add in some lighting when you don't have it. But I didn't actually use that built-in LED for this shoot. Instead, for my key light, I used an Aperture Nova, and I had that just behind a sheet of diffusion. And I had that on full blast on 100%, and the Kelvin temperature, that was 5600. So I just wanted like a white blanket of a nice soft ambient light kind of lighting the camera right side of the frame. And then on the opposite side of the frame, I used an Aperture 300X, And I had that with a Fresnel mount kind of all the way into the spot, and I brought the camera really low because I wanted to get the shadow of the beans as it raked across the frame. And I set the color temperature to that, to 2700 Kelvin, because I really wanted this early morning sunrise, hard sun hit look of the beans, as if we're drinking coffee first thing as the sun's coming up. Nothing better than that, am I right? But yeah, I had that just really low in the frame, casting a lot of shadow across the beans and getting some color contrast between the key light and this rim light. And like I said before, especially with this lens being f/14, and I was shooting it actually f/30 or something like that for this shot, on top of being at 120 frames per second, shutter speed being 240, everything was really, really dark. So my ISO was at 3200 with those settings, and all the lights had to be on 100%. So it's definitely something where you need a lot of lighting, or you kind of have to rely on your camera's ISO for this lens. And from there, it just took a couple of different trials, a couple of different takes, just to make sure the timing went right. Sarah was in charge of dropping the beans, I was in charge of pouring the coffee, and together everything really came together to be a caffeinated mess and looks super great in only, I think, 2 or 3 takes. But let's take a second and just talk about the lens itself for a minute. So what is this lens actually good for? Well, like I said before, it's a very niche lens, and there's only a few things that it's really, really great for, and one of those things is macro. And for example, I shot for a jeweler here in Vermont, and it did an amazing job of getting so ridiculously close to all their stones and diamonds. The sapphire and this diamond just looked incredible, really up close with that. So whether it's macro or you're doing food photography, videography, product work, anything along those lines, it's a very niche lens, but it can really do stellar work in that corner of the industry. And the question of should you buy it or should you rent it? I mean, I would say definitely don't buy it outright at first. Rent it, get a hold of it, do a practice shoot, see if it works out for you in your day-to-day workflow. If it's something that you would use just occasionally, rent it and just add it to the budget of everything. It'd be a lot cheaper to rent than to just buy and use it once or twice. But if you're consistently doing this product work or this food work or this macro work, it might be beneficial for you to add this to your kit and add this to your selection of lenses. There are a lot of times that this lens can be used practically, but there's also other times when this lens is just really cool and a fun toy to play with. But all in all, it's something that was a blast to work with, and I'm glad that Laowa let me play around with it. But that's all that I have for you guys today. If you like this, please hit the like button, the share button. Don't forget to subscribe, or the subscribe button, and don't forget to share. Any order of those, which you so please. Yeah. Anyway, I'll see you next week. Class dismissed. See you later.